Good evening, everybody, and welcome to week 4 of the Jet Fuel podcast for episode 4, the official Winnipeg Jets podcast of GShow Productions on the GShow Productions YouTube channel. I'm your host, Graham, the GShow Forsyth. The Jet Fuel podcast is brought to you by Make Canada Fasteners and Tools, your one-stop shop for all your industrial needs. Be sure to visit their website at makecanadafasteners.shop and also visit them in store at Brandon and Winnipeg locations, the two places they're located at in the province of Manitoba. We're also brought to you by Terrico, serving Manitoba producers for 80 years, or for over 80 years, that is. Be sure to check out their great products at terrico.ca today, and a new sponsor to the Jet Fuel podcast, and of course to GShow Productions and Goaltenders, your goalie's personal review video review service, that is. Be sure to visit the website GordyTumilsonGoalies.ca to experience goaltending coaching in a different way as he goes one-on-one with you through Zoom, going over footage and all that great stuff. But yeah, the regular season is almost here for the Winnipeg Jets. They actually are going to be starting their season in Calgary before they play against the Florida Panthers, Paul Maurice and the crew there. But yeah, exciting times as the NHL regular season is almost here. In tonight's episode, I'm going to be going through the projected lineup for the Jets at this point as they near their final preseason game coming up. I believe it's tomorrow night. Also going to be talking about some news in terms of who's been reassigned and placed where throughout the organization. But to start things off here on the Jet Fuel podcast, I'm going to be joined by a friend of mine, Liam Davies. We actually go to the same college program at Red River College, Polytech, the downtown campus here in Winnipeg. And yeah, I recorded it with him on Monday, the preseason game between the Jets and the Calgary Flames, their most recent one, hadn't started at that point. So we just go over the Friday matchup the Jets had this past Friday against the Ottawa Senators. We also go into Ville Heinola and how great he's been so far this preseason for the Jets. In my opinion, I think he's earned a roster spot. We're going to get into that later on when I go solo. And yeah, we talk about some other great stuff too. So please join me in welcoming in Liam Davies, a good friend of mine here on this edition of the Jet Fuel podcast for episode 4, brought to you by Make Canada Fasteners and Tools, Terrico, and Goaltenders. It's my good friend Liam Davies joining this edition of the Jet Fuel podcast. He's got a sweet setup in the back, a bunch of Jets jerseys. He's not going to show you farther to my left, farther to his right, because or maybe he will. He's got some Calgary Flames, a little sneak peek there of a Calgary Flames jersey. That's who the Jets are playing tonight. We are doing this recording on the Monday night, 2 days before Jet Fuel episode number 4 airs. But Liam, how you doing? How's the day off been? Great to see you.
Doing fantastic. Thanks for asking. Good weekend, a long weekend for us actually. So yeah, just got back from the lake and ready to get back in the swing of things.
Yeah,
Clock starting.
For sure. Lake of the Woods, I'm sure it treated you nicely this weekend, eh?
Oh yeah. Yep.
Yeah,
right you know it.
Right on. Well, yeah, you'd mentioned it. Hockey, regular season. I mean, you didn't mention it, but regular season is starting soon. The Jets only have about 2 preseason games left before they start off the real games on the 14th coming up against the Florida Panthers. But your thoughts so far on how preseason's been looking for the Winnipeg Jets? They open up with 2 wins and they've dropped their last 2.
So despite losing the last couple of games, I still feel pretty comfortable watching them play. A lot of the guys who I expected to shine have been shining. One of them has been shining but is now gone, but we'll talk about that later. I'm sure you know who I'm talking about. But yeah, I'm super, super happy to see how our new goalies are doing. That's probably the biggest thing for me is, having some, like, I find goalies, to me, the goalie's the backbone of the team, and to have, like Delia, Bressois in the back pocket, Milic coming up, who we haven't seen in the preseason, but I'm pretty happy. I'm pretty happy.
Yeah, and Brossoit, he played on Friday's game. He was the only goalie to see the net in that loss against Ottawa. And despite one weaker goal, like he was looking pretty solid. He ended up earning a star in that game, the third star. And it's great to see that the Jets have that type of insurance in the back of the net. And it looks like the future of the pipeline angle for the Jets is looking promising, which is nice. But going back to that game last Friday, I mean, we saw some bad habits happening. I mean, puck management was shaky at times. The coverage in the D zone wasn't the greatest. There was missed assignments, leaving guys open. But despite all that, I think a huge thing throughout this preseason is that the Jets have looked good moving the puck in the O zone. The puck luck wasn't entirely there in that game against Ottawa. If the Jets had some chances to go in the back of the net, a few more, and were able to solve the goaltending of Mandalese, maybe they end up winning that game and don't lose it 3-1. And some good rush chances as well for the Jets, like I said. Good puck movement, but I mean, a guy like Logan Stanley kind of stuck out like a sore thumb at times. The turnover from Jansen Harkins was a blatant one that was unfortunate that led to that second goal of the game from Claude Giroux. And yeah, I mean, overall, it's nice to see a guy like Ville Heinola playing like he's having his career dependent on it, it seems. Trying to get that shot with the Winnipeg Jets in their lineup. And we've seen him playing really good so far this preseason, which is nice to see. I mean, the guys that have looked good have looked good. The guys that have not looked so good, I mean, it's kind of expecting a guy like Logan Stanley and some of the weaker players out there for the Jets. But yeah, overall, at the end of the day, it's just preseason hockey, and it's nice to see a guy like Parker Ford really shining and showing what he could do in terms of battling for a potential 13th forward roster spot. And yeah, I mean, going back to the goaltending, it's been a bright spot for sure for the Jets throughout this preseason.
Yeah, so going back to that game, actually, we're still talking about it, but that game against Ottawa, right at the top, you mentioned some bad habits. And one thing that has stood out to me all throughout last season, and I'm praying it's not as big of an issue this season. But the last game made me worried is actually the face-off percentage, which has never been um, fantastic for the Jets. But just to put it in perspective, that first period against the Sens there, even though, of course, our regular season game day centers aren't playing, but the faceoffs were 4-10 in favor of the Sens in period one. Period two, we played better than the first period, but it was still pretty close to even. But then in the third period, you'd think they'd be showing a little more desperation. The faceoffs were still 14-8 for the Sens, and so I think that's one thing they should really focus on going into the season. Um, but yeah, I mean, aside from that, I think you covered most of the positives I had in mind about that game. Puck movement in the ozone. That's good to see. But again, yeah, gonna knock the bad habits, I think.
Yeah, for sure. And face-offs, I mean, it was a constant storyline last year for the Jets. I mean, when a fourth liner like Kevin Stenlin is like one of your most reliable, if not your most reliable face-off man in the dot, that is definitely worrisome. But like you said, I mean, yeah, like Shifley wasn't playing. He's the number one center on this team. Perfetti probably not going to play for the rest of this preseason as a precaution, which I think is smart. He's looking to be the team's second line centerman, but at the same time, he hasn't been the strongest at faceoffs. I think that the Jets centermen need to find different ways to change it up. Maybe try not to win the faceoffs as cleanly if you're struggling with that, and more so looking to tie guys up. And I get that Cole Perfetti is a smaller guy, but it's more so for guys like an Adam Lowry who's bigger, right? Who I think needs to focus a lot more on that if there is struggles there. And I mean, they brought in a guy in Rasmus Kupari who I think is probably going to get that fourth line centerman job. That was 54% last year, like 54.4% off the top of my head. I can't quite remember, but definitely something that has to change because faceoff's so huge of gain possession and starting off the play the right way. And something I think all Jets fans want to see improve for sure this season coming up for them to have more success in terms of those habits there.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's definitely winning a face off. Getting the possession right off the bat here, you get a chance to settle in. I think that could totally change the numbers for us in terms of, the percentage of time where we actually have the puck and the percentage of time where we're chasing the puck, burning energy, giving them the upper hand that way. So
Let's dive into some guys that have been released. Well, one guy in particular, he got claimed by the Pittsburgh Penguins off waivers. It's Jansen Harkins. He scored 2 goals throughout this preseason so far. I know that there's been some Jets fans that have been pleased with his play, but it wasn't enough for him to stay in camp for the Jets. He ends up being claimed by the Pittsburgh Penguins. I assume that's something you're not too happy about. Dive into your thoughts on them letting Jansen Harkins go.
yeah, so I mean, what can you really do? It's really unfortunate, to lose a guy like that. I can tell. I was actually just talking with from Vic from school the other day, and he was noticing that his skating seems to be much better than it was last year. Um, he's taken longer, smoother strides. He seems like he's improved, and he's always been putting in a lot of that effort. I think last season he played maybe 30 games up with the Jets, and then when he was down with the Moose, he had 25 goals, 25 assists, 50 points. So he's essentially, for the time that he was in the AHL, he was just about a point per game player down there, and he was coming up and he was filling his role really well up with the Jets. And I think he's one of those guys who should be, well, at least in my eyes, like a sort of go to if we need to fill for a spot. Harkins can come up and do that. So yeah, just unfortunate, but I think Pittsburgh will treat him well over there.
Yeah, and I mean Jansen Harkin's always been a guy. I had Scott Billick on the show a few episodes ago. Always a guy that shows his strengths throughout the preseason, and it just seems like to me throughout time his game has never really carried over in terms of the consistency you need to play at the NHL level. And sure, his skating looks like it's improved. He brings that high energy as well. But by the stats, he hasn't been the greatest in the D zone so far in these preseason games. He gives up more chances than he creates, and I think that for a guy that is kind of on the brink of if he's going to be released or not, if you send him down to the AHL or not, like those plays like the turnover on the Giroux goal, they make that much more of a difference. Then you look at a guy like Parker Ford, who's been having a pretty strong preseason for himself. You look at the stats, and he creates more positively in terms of his offensive chances compared to his defensive chances. So, for a guy like Jansen Harkins, it's unfortunate because that could be a guy that you could plug into the lineup, right? Down the line, if you do see some injuries, with his skating improved, that's so huge for him. But I just feel like it's a type of player where, his role is replaceable in a way. And the Jets have maybe found a guy like Parker Ford. I mean, there's a guy like Janssen Fialbi as well, who they've signed too. David Gustafson has looked pretty solid and brings a more reliable defensive game. I just feel like Jansen Harkins is kind of in one of those spots where he's been in and out of the lineup for the Winnipeg Jets throughout time, and the Jets have more options in that spot now where they can let a guy like Jansen Harkins go.
Yeah, and I guess it's possible I am speaking from a little bit of bias. I walked past him in a hallway one time last year, and he said hi to me. I said hi to him, and it was a pretty cool moment. He just seemed like a super nice guy. So you do bring some fantastic points to the table. I mean, like you mentioned, Parker Ford, who's been just putting in all this effort, and he's standing out there. He's quick. He's got a nice shot. Like his passing, the goal where him and Harkins connected the other night. I think that was against. Oh, I totally forget who that was against. Edmonton. No, yeah, it was against Edmonton the other night. I'm pretty sure where they had a spectacular passing play, but it is all really because of Parker Ford that goal even happened in the first place. It was a phenomenal pass that he made kind of behind his back over to Harkins, who just was where he needed to be in the moment. So yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, like, it's just the unfortunate thing about being more of that depth player in the NHL, right? Especially since the Jets, I feel like, have improved in terms of bringing in some of those pieces. They got some nice looking prospects as well that, who knows if they're ever going to get a chance to play in the lineup. I'm not sure how Winnipeg's going to operate in that way, but yeah. I just feel like I don't know if it was just the Giroux turnover that kind of caused this decision, but Jets have had so much time to kind of see what Jansen Harkins is all about. And at the end of the day, as much as like I do like the guys that bring that high energy, it's just, he's a replaceable player, and it's tough to see him go if you're a fan of the guy. One guy who I think has been impressing though, and I talked about it, paraphrasing him, basically saying that he's playing like it's his last shot to make an NHL roster. That's kind of how he's handling it. It's Ville Heinola. He played fantastic against top guys like Tim Stützle, Giroux, and Tarasenko in that game against the Ottawa Senators, limiting their chances and, more so putting up more offensive chances when he was out on the ice against them. A guy that's so good in transition. We've been seeing that early on so far this preseason. Not the biggest guy, but makes up for it with, I think, a pretty good stick and good gap control. And he's been a guy that, as we saw against Ottawa, he rings a puck off the post and was looking nice, really comfortable moving that puck side to side with a guy like Dylan Sandberg and locating some guys and setting them up for chances. Your thoughts on how Ville Heinola has looked so far this preseason? Do you feel like he's earned a roster spot at this point?
Well, the only issue I see with him joining the roster is we just don't have a ton of space on the roster. But I do really like Ville, like you mentioned. He's got a pretty good stick, and he's a good skater. He's like again, he's not big, but you know I think that's not really so much an issue if you're you know using what you have in the proper ways, like you mentioned, gap control, or just having your stick in the right spot and knowing kind of when to strike, take the puck off somebody. But mostly, I think what stands out to me about him is just how comfortable he looks out on the line there. Like he'll have the puck with him, you can put him on a power play, and he'll know whether or not he needs to shoot, or if he needs to pass it again, or if he needs to just be patient, wait a moment before taking the shot. Um, yeah, and I do like the idea of him playing on a line with someone like Sandberg. Of course, they're both young guys, and um, they could really kind of grow together, develop a really strong chemistry, and be really solid. Dylan Sandberg had really good numbers last year defensively as well. Um, so combined with somebody like Heinola over, he was with DeMello. No, yeah, DeMello last year, correct?
Nate
Is
Schmidt
that who Sandberg?
most of the season. For most of the season, yeah. I think,
Okay,
yeah, Morrissey played more so with DeMello, pretty
with
sure,
DeMello,
last
right,
year.
right.
Yeah, I know Sandberg. The two main partners he played with were Pionk as well as Schmidt. But yeah, I like Dylan Sandberg a lot as well. He's been talked about a lot on this show. I think he's a future top four defenseman for the Winnipeg Jets. Looking nice on that left side. And I think like with his strength of being that, good defensive defenseman, I mean, he can transition well, but paired with a guy like Ville Heinola down the line, if that does end up being the case, that creates for a pretty good pairing in terms of how the different styles complement each other. I think for Ville Heinola, you're right in terms of like there's not much room for him on the roster right now. But if he continues to play like he's been playing to finish off this preseason season like he has so far, I think the Jets are going to have a tough decision because this is a guy that's expressed he wants to play in the NHL, a guy that I think it is shown he deserves more of an opportunity than the Jets have given him. I brought it up on this show. I think there's going to be a point if he doesn't get into the lineup where the Jets are going to have to look to trade him. And honestly, like this guy projects to, in my opinion, when he does get to the NHL, projects to be a good puck moving defenseman like we saw, a guy who I think could quarterback a power play. He's done it with the Manitoba Moose, has shown strong AHL numbers. And like you said, he looks more confident in his game this year, more comfortable. I think he's playing with even more urgency this year, knowing maybe he feels his time may be running out here in Winnipeg. And that's why we've seen the more urgency. I wouldn't be surprised if he's gone to work and done a lot more things to improve his game throughout the summer as well. But for the way the NHL is going, where puck moving defensemen are, kind of where the game is going, I think that Ville Heinola is exactly what the Jets could be looking to have to be successful as a D-core down the line in the future. And at one point, do you look at guys like Pionk and Schmidt and say, hey, I mean, it's nice to have you guys here, but, Ville Heinola is better than you guys at the end of the day. And I hope that Ville Heinola gets in the lineup over Logan Stanley. But at the same time, like, Logan Stanley projects to be a seventh defenseman at best on this Jets team. My big question is, how much good would that really do Ville Heinola at the end of the day to just sit in the press box for his development?
Yeah, I have to say I definitely agree with you. When you say I'd like to see him make the lineup over Logan Stanley, and I think that seventh spot, at least this season, um, if he doesn't, fight his way onto that top six there, if he doesn't replace somebody like Schmidt or Pionk, although I think mainly Pionk, at least in my eyes, kind of deserves a spot in the top six, whether it's like a third pair or whatever, playing with Sandberg or whoever it is. But Schmidt, I could definitely see splitting some time with Heinola over the season. I mean, last year Schmidt was out a couple times just as a healthy scratch, and they brought in some other defensemen, and which um, proved to be a pretty good decision in the end when it came to their defensive numbers. So I think that seventh spot is probably where he would best belong this season. Splitting some time ideally with Nate Schmidt.
Yeah, and I feel like a guy like Ville Heinola, like we've seen the emergence of Josh Morrissey, especially throughout the past 2 years, especially last year with the type of offensive numbers he's been putting up. But the Jets kind of lack that good transitioning defenseman, and that's exactly what Ville Heinola brings. So I hope that he makes it really hard on the Jets to make a decision in a positive way. And I hope that, they don't just continue to send him down to the AHL. This is a guy that deserves a shot. That's proved it so far in this preseason. He had a pretty strong preseason last year, in my opinion. Obviously, the Jets felt like he needed another year to develop, but yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what happens with Ville Heinola here down the line. Let's get into some injuries to end things off here. Salamonson, an upper body injury. Right now, that's what he's currently listed with. The guy that I don't think is going to make the team. Obviously, going to be a huge part of the Jets' blue line in the future, you'd have to think. But the big ones right now is Perfetti, the hit to the head he suffered against Calgary last Wednesday, and Ehlers with the neck spasms. Both are in doubt to play Thursday. Murad Aites reported 3 days ago that Ehlers and Perfetti were both wearing contact jerseys, which is a good sign. So, Liam, do you feel like, with these guys being held out, it's exactly what it seems to be, more so a precaution for Winnipeg heading into their regular season, where these two guys are going to be huge parts of what this team does offensively this season?
Yeah, I think it's definitely got to be out of precaution. I mean, if they're not wearing the red jerseys or the no contact jerseys, Nate Schmidt actually calls them the Red Dragon jerseys. I don't know if you caught that last year, but he was calling Nikolai Ehlers a Red Dragon when he played in practice in the red jersey, which was pretty awesome. But especially if they're not in those jerseys, it's got to just be precautionary, right? I mean, I think actually Illegal Curve had Perfetti potentially starting tonight. I again don't think that'll be the case. I'm sure the official lineups are already out, but yeah, it's got to just be to keep those two guys safe because they're both top six guys, and they bring a lot to the team. And Cole Perfetti, we've yet to see have a fair shot throughout a whole season. So I think it's just to make sure these guys get to show up and make a bang at the first few games of the season.
Yeah, and it definitely is, frustrating as a Jets fan, especially for me. I mean, Nikolai Ehlers is my favorite player, but objectively, like, this guy's been the best creator offensively for the Winnipeg Jets for like the past 3 seasons on the offensive side of the puck. So I think it's frustrating because you don't get to see him get the reps before the season starts more. So maybe it ends up in him having a slower start to the season, but I'm a fan of them keeping both these guys out with, 2 preseason games left when, preseason is important, but the regular season is even that much more important. Like, you want your best lineup ready to go for the season, especially with these guys having the injury history that they have. Like, you want to take the biggest precautions that you need to have these guys ready to go for opening night against Florida Panthers team who we've seen play pretty physical last season and are going to bring the same physicality again. So yeah, I think that for these guys, like I said, they're going to be huge parts of what Winnipeg does offensively. And unfortunate that, for Ehlers, he hasn't got to touch the ice so far this preseason. Perfetti got to touch it a bit. He's looked pretty comfortable in the second line center position. But yeah, with the injury history they've had, I think that it's the right move to keep these guys out and have them ready to go for October 14th against the Panthers.
Yeah, and even on top of the injuries, keeping those two out of the lineup tonight, there's also the illness kind of going around. I know Shifley was at least slated to play tonight. Doesn't look like he's going to play anymore. Barron, same sort of thing. The illness is kind of going around. It might even be a little bit of a blessing in disguise, right? Because it's given some other guys who might not be able to see the ice again this preseason and most likely won't at any point in the regular season up with the Jets to play the last couple of games in their absence. And who knows, maybe they'll be able to, pull something out and impress us.
Yeah, for sure. It's really at this point in preseason, it's about the guys fighting for roster spots, trying to prove themselves. And you brought up a good point. These illnesses may be a blessing in disguise to allow more opportunity for that to happen. So Winnipeg playing against Calgary tonight. I'll have the update, of course, on this show on Wednesday when it airs. But Liam Davies, a good friend that I met through school, through creative communications, joining this edition of the Jet Fuel podcast, the official Winnipeg Jets podcast of GShow Productions. Liam, it was great to have you on, and we'll have to do this again in the future.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
And that was Liam Davies, of course, like I've already said, a good friend of mine, joining me on this edition of the Jet Fuel podcast for Ep.4, brought to you by Goaltenders, your goalie's personal video review service, as well as Terrico, serving Manitoba producers for over 80 years, and Make Canada Fasteners and Tools. Your one-stop shop for all your industrial needs. Be sure to check out their stores in Brandon and Winnipeg today, and also visit all these sponsors' websites. You won't be disappointed to find what you'll find once you visit those websites. But yeah, the Winnipeg Jets, so far this preseason, they start off with the 2 wins. They've dropped their last few games. Just pulling up the official Jets schedule. They end off their preseason coming up tomorrow when they will be at home to face off the Senators, and their season actually kicks off next Wednesday at 9 p.m. Central Time, so might be doing an earlier edition of the Jet Fuel podcast for that Wednesday night, with all things considering, with them playing at 9 o'clock. Don't really want to be airing this while that game airs. Might do it, but probably going to air it a bit earlier, probably like 6 o'clock, something like that. So be sure to tune in, hoping to have some great guests like Liam, friends of mine, and, some potentially other guests on that edition of the show. The Jets' home opener is next Saturday on the 14th against the Florida Panthers at 3 p.m. But some updates for the Winnipeg Jets. Starting with Chaz Lucius getting reassigned to the AHL, Colby Barlow getting sent back to the OHL. This is some older news now, but yeah, not really surprising Chaz Lucius being sent back. to the AHL. Didn't look that impressive in preseason, hoping that he's able to find his game and his confidence, get back into a groove with the Winnipeg Jets farm team, the Manitoba Moose, this season. Other guys that have been reassigned to the Manitoba Moose are Ashton Sautner, Brad Lambert, Jeff Malott, and Dominic Toninato. Elias Salamonson, Kristen Reichel, and Danny Zilkin were also assigned to the Moose, and it appears that Salamonson, the Jets have control over where he plays, so I think that he's a guy that's going to make an impact at the AHL level. He's that good already. Yeah, it would benefit him going back to Sweden, but to get him playing in the second league in North America, that level before the NHL for a full season would be huge. I'm excited to see the future of Salamonson with this Winnipeg Jets organization. Another player that's been placed on waivers but expected to be reassigned to the Manitoba Moose is Jeffrey Ville. A guy that's shown to be a gritty player throughout this preseason for the Winnipeg Jets. Going to be exciting to see what he does on the Manitoba Moose. And, Capobianco has been skating with the Winnipeg Jets. He's been dealing with a groin injury from what I've seen, but he's been skating with a separate group. So, I guess diving back into the Winnipeg Jets' last game against the Calgary Flames. It was a fun one. I didn't get to watch the game because it wasn't broadcasted on cable TV. My family still has cable TV. I know it's a bit old school, but it gets the job done for us. Jets were up 2-1 after the first period, though. Ville Heinola scoring a beautiful goal to open things up, assisted by Alex Iafallo and Cole Perfetti. Toninato then scored, assisted by Logan Stanley and Ville. Lindholm scoring for the Calgary Flames from Hanfin and Tanev. That was the end of the first period scoring. Gustafsson opened up the scoring in the second for the Jets, putting up 3-1. But then Jets ended up blowing the lead in a matter of 3 minutes, about that, with goals from Ruzicka, Dubé, and Backlund, as they ended up taking a 4-3 lead. Gustafsson tied it up with his second of the game, assisted by Parker Ford, who has been fantastic for the Jets in this preseason, posting some really solid analytics, some of the best on the team. I think the best among the team in terms of Corsi for the chances he's created there, but it wouldn't be enough for the Jets, as in the third period, Coronado scored on the power play, assisted by Backlund and Weegar. Jets went 0-for-2 on the power play, killed off 3 out of 4 of the penalties that they took, but of course Calgary won the game with that power play goal. So, Jets have dropped 3 in a row in preseason at this point. There's been some illness that's also gone around with this Jets club, as mentioned. Mark Scheifele, Kyle Connor, Velarde, and Barron were guys battling that illness, but they were back on the ice this morning for the Jets, as reported by Joshua Frey-Sam. Jay Frey-Sam, that's where you can find him on X. He's going to be reporting on the Jets this season, as it seems, a Winnipeg Free Press reporter, sports reporter, that is. So, nice to hear that. Ehlers, Schmidt, and Chisholm were also practicing, which is nice to hear. Ehlers has been skating in contact jersey, which is nice, knowing that he's been going through injury. He's going to be, I've said it so many times, he's going to be a huge part of the Jets' offense this season, and I can't wait to see Nick Ehlers play this season for the Winnipeg Jets. Of course, my favorite player, as I've mentioned. But, there's been some projected lines that have come out. I want to see, because I saw something from John Liu. I want to see if there was an update in the report. No, this is just in terms of the power play lines. The power play lines that I believe were practicing this morning for the Winnipeg Jets was Velarde, Scheifele, Iafallo, O'Connor, and Morrissey on the first unit, and Niederreiter, Ehlers, Perfetti, Heinola / Schmidt, and Pionk on that second unit. So, going to be interesting to see there. We'll get into power play combinations next week, what I feel like those should be, in my opinion. But I want to get into the projected lines for the Winnipeg Jets. heading into the final preseason game of the preseason for 2023-2024. And these could be giving us a glimpse in terms of what is in store for the Winnipeg Jets, how their lines will be looking for night one or similar to that. So right now it's Connor, Scheifele, Velarde on that first line, Niederreiter, Perfetti, Ehlers on the second line. I follow Lowry, Appleton on the third line, Barron, Kuparian, Mesikov on the fourth line, and then the extra line is Axel Jonsson, Fialbi, David Gustafsson, and Parker Ford. On defense, it's Morrissey, DeMello, Sandberg, Pionk, Dylan, Heinola, and Stanley and Schmidt. So let's get into the forward groups first of all. These were lines from today, and the top line from today in practice, that is, but the top line hasn't had much of a chance to play with each other outside, the only game they've played with each other and played in this preseason has been in that second game against the Edmonton Oilers at home, where the Jets, that was their last win of this preseason at this point, most recent one, that is. But in terms of that top line, when they did play with each other in that game, it looks like this line fits well, and Gabe Vilardi brings an all-around game to that line, a complete game, especially in the defensive zone, that could elevate this line's D-zone play. Very good offensive player with good hands, good skating ability. He's got the shot. He looks like a complete player, like I said. And Scheifele and Connor, we already know how good they are offensively. So, pairing that more complete defensive player on that line who can also bring a high level of offense, potentially in Vilardi, I like the sounds of it. That second line with Nick Ehlers, I think that he's going to add that boost of speed and that boost of driving the play at a high level, and will help elevate players like Cole Perfetti, who's reliable in all ends of the ice, good 200-foot player that makes players around himself better in his own right. And you look at a guy in Niederreiter, who the Jets acquired at the trade deadline last year. He's put up at least 20 goals in his past 3 seasons. He's going to add that scoring touch to that line, and Niederreiter also adds that physical presence, a guy that's going to not be afraid to go into the corners and do the dirty work for that line, taking some of that pressure off of guys like Perfetti and Ehlers to do so. I think in terms of that third line, I follow. It's nice to have him. I think he's a nice addition to this Jets team who's going to add offense to a third line that needs it. Not a ton, but an added offensive skill set that I think is needed on that line, and add some playmaking as well. He has 2 assists so far in this preseason, most recently on that first goal of Monday's game against the Calgary Flames. And this Jets line, of course, touted as more of that shutdown line. Lowry is physical, but I think the big question is Mason Appleton. He hasn't really made that much of an impact so far during this preseason, and I know that I've brought it up how it seems like Bowness loved to go to that line last year of Lowry and Appleton, keeping them together as a duo. My big question is, and Evan Samoilov brought it up, and I do agree with this, is you want to have 3 lines that can score. I think like adding a guy like Parker Ford, who has 1 goal, 4 assists, and 4 preseason games so far, over a point per game to that line, could add some more offense, even more offense compared to Mason Appleton, if he is able to carry through his strong play into the preseason, into the regular season. That's the biggest question at this point for Parker Ford. But I like that fourth line a lot. They've looked good so far this preseason in the games they've played with each other. It's a line with a good mix of players that bring that good energy, players that should be able to create good chances against other fourth lines. Like I said, they've looked good in camp so far. And yeah, in terms of the 13th forward for the Jets, out of Axel Jonsson, Fialbi, Gustafsson, and Parker Ford, I think it's going to be between Parker Ford and David Gustafsson. Honestly, Gustafsson has shown he can put up that offense so far in this preseason. 2 goals last game. You know how good he is defensively, but honestly, if Parker Ford continues to show what he can do, create at the high level he's creating, like I said, most Corsi 4 chances so far out of any forward of the Jets in their lineup throughout this preseason. That's a nice find for the Jets and someone who could plug into the lineup and, like I said, could fill in nicely on, maybe it's the third line, maybe even the fourth line, and you could put Nemesnikov on that third line for the Jets where he can do the good complementary things that he does, while adding some, offensive touch. He hasn't put up the most offense throughout his career, but did some really good things with the Jets last season and has shown well in this preseason so far. Looking at the decor for the Winnipeg Jets, Morrissey, DeMello, Sandberg, Pionk, Dillon, Heinola, Stanley, and Schmidt. From a drill today, apparently this morning, that Chisholm rotated in with DeMello, playing with him in a drill. I believe it was with DeMello, maybe went in for him. But speaking of that top pair, like Morrissey and DeMello, it's the best pairing on this Jets team currently. They complement each other so well. Morrissey, that good puck-moving defenseman. DeMello has been the best defensive defenseman for the Jets since he's been acquired by this organization. I love the game of Dylan Sandberg. Can't say enough great things about him. I've talked about him so much on this show. By myself and as well as with guests, but he's big, a good skater, good through transition, and I think he's going to be defensively reliable for this Jets team this season. And then you look at Ville Heinola. Now, me and Liam Davies, and I've been saying it pretty much since this show has started, that I said at the start that I think that he has to have a really strong camp to make an impact on this Jets team to really crack the lineup, which he has. He's been the most impactful defenseman for the Jets throughout this preseason. The numbers tell it. He's been showing it actually on the score sheet, scoring last game. And yeah, I just feel like, this is a guy that should be in the starting six for the Winnipeg Jets. I know me and Liam Davies were just talking about how he'll probably be that seventh defenseman, and I've talked about it before. If anything, he'll be that seventh defenseman like last week with Connor Hrabchuk. But the way he's been playing, if you're in a win-now mode, you play your best players. And I get that you got Brendan Dillon. That's an expiring UFA after this season, and you're paying him some reasonable amount of money, not a ton, just under $4 million. You're paying guys like Pionk almost $6 million, as well as Schmidt, who has a no-move clause. But compared to Pionk, Schmidt, and Dillon, who Dillon has not been very good this preseason at all. He hasn't been that strong. Like, Heinola has outplayed all of those guys. Schmidt, he's only played one game. He's out with an injury right now, but other than blocking shots, he ain't that great. Dillon has struggled, like I said, and Pionk hasn't been fantastic. Like, I think that, you also look at a guy like Logan Stanley, who I think has been the Jets' worst D-man throughout this preseason. Not really a surprise. Heinola should be in over all of those guys. Now, will the Jets do it? I don't know, but what you get with Ville Heinola is you get a guy who has shown his strength offensively in this preseason so far. You get that offensive upside with him, a guy that can also quarterback a power play. Like I said earlier in the show, he's shown that throughout this preseason so far, moving the puck really well on the power play when he's played there. He's also been showing his strength defensively as well with the good cap control, the good stick. He limited the best forwards on that Ottawa team on Friday in terms of chances and put up more positive chances for. What else can Ville Heinola do to prove his worth to play in a top six or a defensive lineup of their starting six? I don't know if he doesn't get in now, if he'll ever get in with the Winnipeg Jets, because he's been the most impactful defenseman for this club throughout this preseason. He's got a lot of upside. He's looked better than at least, four of the Jets' defensemen so far this preseason. He's been the most impactful defenseman throughout this preseason. And if you want to win and you're in that win now mode with what the Jets are clearly in that state of mind, I don't see how Ville Heinola doesn't get into the lineup in this preseason, in the regular season for the Jets. unless, he completely craps the bed in the last game coming up this Thursday, tomorrow. Like, I just think that he's made it so tough for the Jets not to put him in their starting six this season. And if they don't, based off his play, I think they are making a huge mistake. Outside of Josh Morrissey, this guy might be the best puck-moving defenseman on this Jets D-core. And, he's really showing off his skills. I thought that he had a pretty good preseason last year and deserved to be at least a seventh defenseman on this Jets team who you could switch in. Now I think he's fully solidified himself as a guy that should be a regular on this Winnipeg Jets team throughout this year. So, you also look at a guy like Declan Chisholm. This is a guy that I think, could very well be a guy that is a good seventh defenseman for this Jets team this season. Now, of course, you got to move a guy like Nate Schmidt if you're going to make this happen. You got to move somebody. The Jets got to make that tough decision, and they better make it because, come on, enough is enough. You got to start playing guys that actually deserve to be in the lineup on that D-core that ain't that great. And Ville Heinola, at the very least, has proven that he can be that guy that can be regular in a starting lineup. He's shown it in the AHL. He's shown it in the NHL so far this preseason. Put him in. But, that's about going to do it for this edition of the Jet Fuel podcast. When we come back next week, it's going to be the start of the regular season, and it's going to be really exciting, and I can't wait for it. I've been your host, Graham, the GShow Forsyth. Special thanks to you, the viewer, for tuning in to this episode and watching on this Wednesday night or whenever you guys decide to watch this episode or listen to it. We're planning to put this one on Spotify, so thank you to you listeners out there who might have listened to this one. Thank you to our sponsors in Make Canada Fasteners and Tools, as well as Terrico and Goaltenders for sponsoring the Jet Fuel podcast, a new sponsor and goaltenders to the GShow Productions brand. We also have a website now, gshow.ca. I'm still learning how to use it, so content's going to start rolling up there consistently soon. Planning on releasing some content there in terms of our blog section on Monday, coming up on Thanksgiving Monday, so stay tuned for that. But we'll be back next Wednesday. Be sure to check out our socials for more details on the show coming up for episode 5 in terms of who's going to be on it, what's going to be talked about. Going to be diving into special teams in that episode, and that's going to be a lot of fun, as well as some other great stuff. Previewing the Jets season, the outlook, the predictions that I got for them, where I expect them to finish in the regular season, what their playoff hopes could be like. So, lots of great things coming up. Stay tuned for that, but I'll leave you with Nico Feniak's outro for this edition of this show, the Jet Fuel Podcast, the official Winnipeg Jets podcast. Until next Wednesday, folks, I've been your host, Graham, the GShow Forsyth, giving you the salute, peacing out, and saying so long on this Wednesday night. Take care, everybody.